This is how Alvin Karpis reacted when Bonnie and Clyde got shot to pieces on the Louisiana road. And I'll tell you straight up, his reaction was the strangest one of the whole outlaw bunch because the man barely moved. Figuring out why is where we're headed today. On May the 23rd, 1934, Karpis was holed up in Toledo, Ohio with a woman named Dolores Denali. They were living quiet on his cut of the $200,000 Bremer ransom. That was their second kidnapping. The year before, they had taken William Helm Jr. For $100,000. And when I say quiet, I mean it. He wasn't robbing banks or he wasn't making headlines. And there wasn't a run and gun battle anywhere on his calendar. He had his calendar cleared. He was doing the outlaw equivalent of taking a vacation. The problem was the federal government had recorded the serial number of every single dollar bill in that ransom. So every time he spent one of them, he risked telling the FBI what town he was standing in. His retirement fund was a tracking device. Now, about the man doing all that quiet living. By the time Bonnie and Clyde died, Karpis had already changed his face. Months earlier, him and Fred Barker had paid an Underworld doctor named Joseph Moran to alter their faces and take off their fingerprints. Hopefully it worked better than Dillinger, but we'll find out here in a minute. Moran was a drinker whose hands shook. That's why it won't working on me, right? And the operation went about as, well, how'd you expect from a surgeon you found the same way you found the guy to fix your transmission for cash? The face work was a butcher job. Fred screamed so bad they had to hold him down. Karpis sat through it without a sound, which tells you something about the man. And the fingerprint job actually took, well, decades later, Karpis had trouble proving to the Canadian government who he was because the tips of his fingers had nothing left on them. So the word comes out of Louisiana that a 6-man posse just put around 130 rounds into Bonnie and Clyde's Ford with them in it. And they didn't give a warning either before they opened up. Most folks needed the papers to explain what that meant. Karpis had figured it out months before. The ambush wasn't new to him. It was just confirmation of how things go. Now, an outlaw in 1934 had a standard playbook for bad news. And the playbook said, act bigger. You'd pull a job to show the world you weren't scared. Maybe you'd send a letter to a newspaper or get yourself photographed somewhere the government would find embarrassing. That playbook is how most of those men got famous. And famous is exactly what Karpis had decided was the problem. Because look at what that ambush in Louisiana actually proved. The government didn't outfight Bonnie and Clyde. No, sirree. They found out where they'd be on a Wednesday morning, and that information come from a person they trusted. Fame made that kind of betrayal easy. The more people who knew your face and your business, the more people who could sell you out. That's what actually got outlaws killed. The shooting only came after somebody sold you out, where they talked. Karpis was at least, well, he was already the least famous man on the government's list, and his reaction to the May 23rd was to get even less famous. That spring, Liberty magazine had run a big photograph of the top wanted men in the country, and Karpis was one of them, with $5,000 on him to offer to any man who brought him in dead. Captured wasn't part of the deal, it just said dead. He wrote later that incidents like that would scare the hell out of him, and I would think so as well. And that's about as honest as it gets, because outlaws didn't usually put the word scared in writing. My uncle, he'll describe the time a bear came through a deer camp 40 different ways before he'll use the word scared. Karpis used it. He understood the situation exactly as it was. So while the summer of 1934 heated up, Karpis went the opposite direction of every instinct his profession had trained into him. And 1934 turned into a bloody year for that crowd. John Dillinger got shot dead outside a Chicago theater in July, the biograph. Pretty boy Floyd went down in Ohio cornfield that October, and Babyface Nelson didn't survive a roadside gunfight in November. The FBI's war on crime was running hot, and the loud men were dying fast. Karpis and a partner named Harry Campbell, they drifted west, turning up as far out as Casper, Wyoming, because the heat from the Bremerton kidnapping was making life harder everywhere they were known. They didn't rob a bank or take a payroll. The most wanted crew in America spent that summer acting like a couple of guys on a long, boring sales route. And that was the whole trick. The government system ran on tips from citizens and informants. And a quiet man gives nobody anything to report. You can't ambush a man on a Wednesday morning if nobody on earth can say where he'll be. There was one exception to the quiet. Remember that doctor with the shaky hands, Joseph Moran? Well, he was still walking around Ohio that summer, and he had two habits that don't mix. He drank heavy, and he talked a lot. One night in late July, drinking with a gang at a club outside Toledo, Morgan bragged to the whole table. He said, "I have you guys in the palm of my hand." And look at what that man was walking around with. He knew what Karpis' new face looked like and how the fingerprints come off because he did the work himself. Bonnie and Clyde had been killed just because somebody close to him talked to the law. And here was the one man who could undo everything Karpis had paid for, drunk in public, bragging about the hold he had over them. Moran was never seen alive again after that. I think they took him out on a boat and went fishing. I guess he was the bait. Authorities said Fred Barker and Karpis took him fishing on Lake Erie that night. Karpis said in his book years down the road that Morgan got buried. More than a year later, a body washed up on the Canadian side of the lake. It had no hands and no feet. The government said it was Moran. Karpis said it wasn't. And I just note that neither version of that story ends with Moran alive. He was pretty much unalived. The quiet held. Karpis moved through Cleveland, then he cleaned out of the country to Cuba, where he rented a villa for $300 a month and lived like an ordinary businessman on a long stay. Later, he set up in Hot Springs, Arkansas. The police there were so crooked that one of the men could live in the town openly as long as the right people got paid. He didn't pull another headline job for well over a year, not until a train robbery in Garrettsville, Ohio in November 1935. Meanwhile, the FBI had picked up Doc Barker in January of that year. Dark's real name was Arthur, and he was the third man at the core of the gang. So that arrest was exactly the kind of attention Karpis spent 18 months trying not to attract. Now, put that timeline next to everybody else's. The loud outlaws in 1934 had their remaining lives down to weeks. Karpis stretched his into years, and he did it by treating May the 23rd as a lesson instead of a challenge. So here's what all that quiet actually bought him. There were only 4 men ever named public enemy number 1 by the federal government during its war on crime. John Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd, and Babyface Nelson, and Alvin Karpis. The first 3 went out the way Bonnie and Clyde went out, on the wrong end of the government's guns with no trial. Now, Karpis was the 4th man. He's the only one who was taken alive. When the FBI finally quartered him in New Orleans on May the 1st, 1936, nearly 2 full years after that Louisiana ambush, agents swarmed his car before he could touch the rifle inside. And then they discovered a problem. Check this out. This is what they expected, right? Nobody in the whole raiding party had thought to bring handcuffs. They came to kill him, not to arrest him, and Karpis denied them that excuse. So they tied his hands up with some agent's neckerchief, or his necktie. He swore later that J. Edward Hoover only walked up once the car was surrounded and safe. Karpis did 26 years on Alcatraz, longer than any other prisoner they ever had, and walked out on parole in 1969. Bonnie and Clyde died in 1934, and Karpis lived 45 more years, and he spent some of the last ones writing a book that laid out his reasoning for his own words. The cops were knocking off all the big crooks, he wrote. He read the same news everybody else did on May the 23rd, 1934. He was the only one to believe it. If you like this episode, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give us a hype, and I'll see you in the next episode of The Hidden Lens.